Good evening. Thanks very much for joining us on India Business Hour. I'm Shireen Bhan. The headlines we're tracking at this hour. Indian financial markets remain cautious as they wait for fresh triggers from central bankers meeting in Jackson Hole later this week. Stocks give up early gains, drop sharply into the red in the fag end of trade. The Sensex and the Nifty close 0.5% lower. The rupee weakens as traders avoid fresh bets. The Supreme Court says the objective of the PMLA is noble, but adds that two specific aspects of its earlier judgment upholding the validity of the Act need to be reviewed. Will seek the government's response on sections regarding providing the accused with a copy of the enforcement case information report and the reversal of the presumption of innocence. The Supreme Court says its technical committee found malware in 5 of the 29 phones it examined, but it was inconclusive if the malware was Pegasus. Also expresses its disappointment with the union government for refusing to cooperate with the committee. The Delhi High Court refuses to stay the CCI probe into WhatsApp's privacy policy, dismisses a plea by WhatsApp and parent Meta, saying their appeals were devoid of any merit. After prohibiting the export of wheat in May, the government prohibits the export of wheat flour, removes the earlier exemption granted to the export of wheat flour, as all wheat flour exports will now need the approval of an interministerial committee. Adds the move will help curb rising wheat flour prices. Singtel looks to unlock value in Bharti Airtel to divest a portion of its stake in Airtel for around 12,900 crore rupees. The 3.3% stake will go to Bharti Telecom, its joint venture with Bharti Enterprises, reducing Singtel's effective stake in Airtel to 29.7%. The Fertilizer Ministry moves a proposal to introduce One Nation, One Fertilizer from the 2nd of October. Orders all fertilizer companies to change packaging on subsidized fertilizer. Says 2/3 of the bag must display the brand name Bharat and the logo of the central subsidy scheme. The Election Commission sends its recommendation on Jharkhand Chief Minister Hemant Soren's possible disqualification to the governor. Reports suggest the EC has found that Soren misused his position. The Chief Minister hits out at the BJP for propagating these reports, as the contents have not been made public yet. At least 25 people, including 2 children, are dead after Russian missiles strike a railway station in eastern Ukraine. Meanwhile, President Putin orders an increase in the manpower at Russia's armed forces to more than 2 million. Well, let's start with the day's market action before we get to the other big headlines. Financial markets around the world have been treading with caution ahead of the central bankers' meeting in Jackson Hole later this week. And the Indian stock market, no exception. Expiry day took a dramatic turn as indices, which traded in the green for most of the day, dropped sharply into the red in the last hour of trade, both ending 0.5% lower. Anuj is here to wrap up the market action for us. Last hour collapse, Anuj.
Well, the market was doing absolutely fine up until 2:30, and then somehow the last hour really, the bears came back with a vengeance. Maybe it was the expiry factor. It was the monthly expiry, remember, and the market had some decent gains. But the Nifty slipped over 200 points from day's high, and the Bank Nifty slipped 500 points from day's high. In terms of stocks, you had the 2 large cap IT stocks, Infosys and TCS, leading the decline. Some other heavyweights like HDFC, Larsen & Toubro, ITC, some of the stocks which normally move on expiry day were also dragging the market. And of course, you had other names like Adani Ports, Bajaj Finance and Cipla, which were also down. Now, the broader market was actually doing quite okay, even on a day like today, despite the last hour decline. And you had some select gainers like BHEL, L&T Finance, City Union Bank, all F&O names, all up between 5 to 10%. All in all, you'll say that perhaps the trend is still slightly on the upside. There's, of course, this Jackson Hole Symposium, which comes up now. So let's see how the market reacts to that. For today, of course, the last hour really brought some volatility back into the picture.
Anuj, many thanks. Crude oil prices hold firm, with Brent remaining above $100 a barrel. Mounting supply concerns and a potential output cut by major producers and partial shutdown of a U.S. refinery have enabled prices to remain steady. The U.S. economy continues to remain in contraction mode, but is better than feared. The second estimate for Q2 GDP coming in at minus 0.6% versus the first estimate of minus 0.9%. This is much lower than the Q1 actual GDP reading of minus 1.6%. Meanwhile, the number of people seeking jobless claims stood at 2.43 lakh in the week ending the 20th of August. This is much lower than over 14 lakh people seeking jobless claims in the previous week. The Supreme Court has agreed to review aspects of its July 27th PMLA judgment. The court, while observing that the objective of the act is noble, has said it will seek the government's response on sections regarding providing the accused with a copy of the Enforcement Case Information Report, or the ECIR, and the reversal of the presumption of innocence. Ashmit Kumar joins us now with more. Ashmit, this has been a contentious issue. The Supreme Court has now decided a partial review is the way forward. Take us through the aspects that the court is willing to review.
But what's interesting is that it's less than a month back that a bench headed by Justice Khanwilkar had in fact upheld those provisions of PMLA giving sweeping powers to the Enforcement Directorate. And less than a month now, we find that the Apex Court in fact held the review hearing in open court, which is unusual. But nonetheless, the main thrust, that the message that the Apex Court is putting out is that Supreme Court believes, the Chief Justice believes that as far as this judgment is concerned, it is not completely kosher. There are some aspects that the Supreme Court spelled out need to be revisited, need to be relooked, and towards that end, in fact, red flag two very clear aspects. The number one is grant of ECIR. Now, various provisions under the PMLA do not mandate the Enforcement Directorate to serve a copy of the ECIR on the accused person. This is something that the CGI says needs to be revisited, at least prima facie. The second aspect is presumption of innocence. Now, under regular criminal procedure, an accused person is believed to be innocent until proven guilty. So the proof of the burden of proof lies on the prosecutor, on the state. It's the other way around on the PMLA. In the PMLA, the accused person is assumed to be guilty, and therefore the burden of proof lies on him or her to prove his or her innocence. Now, these are aspects that the CGI said that he has an exception, he's taking exception to prima facie and need to be revisited. The centre was very clear, came out all guns blazing, said that this would be in breach of international covenants, that India will bear the brunt, it will have major global ramifications. The Apex Court, however, was not convinced, has issued a notice on this matter and has sought reply from the centre on these particular concerns raised by the CGI himself.
All right, Ashmit, hang in there. Let's talk about the other story that you've been tracking. The Supreme Court has also said that the technical committee set up to probe the allegations of the unauthorized use of Israeli spyware, Pegasus, found malware in 5 of the 29 phones that the committee examined. However, the court said it was inconclusive if the malware was in fact Pegasus. But more importantly, Ashmit, the technical committee also saying clearly that the government did not cooperate in this process.
Well, what's interesting is that behind the genesis of this committee was a position taken by the centre before the top court that due to national security, the centre is not comfortable clarifying whether or not Pegasus was either procured or deployed. And that seems to have been a consistent position even before the technical committee. The CGI said that he's not happy with this observation that has come from the technical committee report. The observation is very clear that on being asked, the centre remained static, remained stuck to its position that it will not clarify, and therefore was not cooperating with the technical committee. And that is one observation that in fact the CGI was quick to red flag and point out before the Solicitor General. But that's only one takeaway. The other takeaway is, what about Pegasus? Was it not used? Well, there were 29 devices that were subjected to forensic investigation. Of the 29, 5 had malware. However, the technical committee, at least from the observations that fell from the court, it emerges that the technical committee believes that the malware cannot be conclusively proven to be Pegasus. In fact, the technical committee observed that this malware could be on account of lack of cyber hygiene. Another key takeaway, of course, was Justice Ravindran. He's the one heading and supervising and monitoring the technical committee. He came out with a separate independent report, and in that report, he's given various recommendations for introducing a law for surveillance with safeguards, ensuring greater privacy of citizens, and also having a grievance redressal mechanism whereby citizens can raise concerns about surveillance. So various recommendations here. We're yet to have the report in the public domain, and that's perhaps when we'll begin to get more clarity on what the contours of this report are and what it means for the Pegasus and the surveillance hearing before the top court.
All right, Ashmit, many thanks for joining us. In another crucial matter heard today, the Supreme Court has issued notice to the Gujarat government on a plea filed against the remission granted to 11 convicts in the Bilkis Bano gang rape case. The court has sought the state government's reply on the plea within 2 weeks. The court has also instructed that the convicts be impleaded in the case. Meanwhile, the Delhi High Court has rejected Meta and WhatsApp's appeals challenging a CCI order calling for a probe into the messaging app's new privacy policy, observing that the plea has no merit. This order paves the way for the CCI to proceed with its investigation against the social media companies for possible abuse of dominant position. The court has asked the companies to approach the competition regulator for any relief on the matter. The Delhi High Court has also refused to stay the Agnipath scheme for recruitment in the armed forces. The court has asked the centre to file a reply on a batch of petitions challenging this scheme. The government has tweaked its policy to ban the export of wheat flour. The centre had in July made the export of wheat flour subject to the approval by Interministerial Committee, but it still led to a significant amount of wheat flour continuing to be exported. Telecom Minister Ashwini Vaishnav has said that 5G services in India will be launched on the 12th of October. He's also promised that 5G coverage will be available across the country in a few years and that the rates will be affordable. The minister launched a common portal to help build telecom infrastructure.
In telecom, we have developed this PM Gati Shakti ROW portal in which all the state governments have now joined. All the major infrastructure ministries like railways, like highways, they have all joined this common portal, and now anybody who wants to install a tower, install a pole, lay fiber, they can all apply on one common portal.
Well, that's the telecom minister. And more news from the telecom space. Singtel looks to unlock value in Bharti Airtel. It will divest a portion of its stake in Airtel for around 12,900 crore rupees. The 3.3% stake will go to Bharti Telecom, its joint venture with Bharti Enterprises, reducing Singtel's direct holding in Airtel to 29.7%. Pharma major Lupin is betting big on the respiratory segment. The company is gearing up to launch an inhaler, Spiriva, in the US after it received a complete response letter from the US FDA. The company has told CNBC-TV18 it is hopeful of getting a final approval for the generic inhaler by Q4. This drug is expected to aid Lupin's margin performance. RBL Bank closed over 5.5% higher after a block deal. College Retirement Equity Fund has bought 45 lakh shares of RBL Bank worth 50 crore rupees. HDFC Bank has entered into a non-binding term sheet with Go Digit Life Insurance to buy a stake in the IPO-bound company. HDFC Bank will invest around 50 to 70 crore rupees in 2 tranches to acquire up to 9.9% stake in the insurer. Former Chief Economic Advisor Krishnamurthy Subramaniam will take over as India's Executive Director at the International Monetary Fund from the 1st of November. The government announced that his appointment will be for 3 years. Currently, Surjit Palla is Executive Director India at the IMF. In a bid to bring uniformity in fertilizer brands across the country, the government has implemented the One Nation, One Fertilizer plan. Companies have been directed to sell their products under a single brand name, Bharat. Sonal Bhutra joins us now to explain what this means. Sonal, take us through the government's order and how are private companies reacting?
Thanks a lot for that. Well, yes, the government has come out with new rules as far as packaging for fertilizer company bags are concerned. They say that they will implement One Nation, One Fertilizer rule by introducing single brand for all the fertilizers, be it private sector or public companies like RCF, NFL, etc. Single brand name for some products like urea will be Bharat Urea, for NPK will be Bharat NPK, DAP will be Bharat DAP, and so on for other products as well. Now, after this, what happens is 2/3 of the fertilizer companies' bags, they will have the fertilizer subsidy scheme, which is run by the government, and also the unified brand that the government has announced. And 1/3 of the bag will have the company which is producing that particular fertilizer's logo and other details as the ones that are required by regulations as well. So fertilizer companies, according to the government, should not procure old bags with effect from 15 September, that is the next month, and new bags under the new scheme will be introduced with effect from 2nd October 2022. And they have by the end of this year, that is 31st December, to completely fade away the older bags from the market. Now, it came across as a sentiment negative for, say, private companies whose brand visibility could be impacted by this particular change in packaging rules. However, this is just a sentiment negative. Overall, on the longer term, they have good brand visibility, they have better distribution and higher market share in distinguished territories or markets as well. So it is not such a big negative that has come across. But yes, there is a big change as far as packaging is concerned in this particular sector.
Investors across the globe have their eyes fixed on Jackson Hole as central bankers gather for their annual symposium. Author, economist and investor Ruchir Sharma says the tightening of monetary policy by the US Fed will have varied impact on emerging economies. He also believes the Chinese economy is the most vulnerable of the emerging economies today.
I think that if you look at emerging markets, there are about 150 developing countries out there. So I think that the Fed's decision has a different impact on different markets. But clearly the most vulnerable to me is China. Because, we've spoken so much about inflation and how inflation is rising everywhere. But one country that is still suffering from possible deflation is China. Their ability to stimulate and cut interest rates is going to be constrained by the fact that the Fed is increasing interest rates because that accelerates capital outflows from China. They don't want a repeat of that. The currency has already depreciated around 7% or so this year.
Well, that's Ruchu Sharma. Let's take a look at the national headlines we're tracking this evening. The Election Commission has sent its recommendations on Jharkhand Chief Minister Hemant Soren's possible disqualification to the governor. Reports suggest the EC has found that Soren misused his position. The Chief Minister hits out at the BJP for propagating these reports as the contents have not been made public yet. Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal has accused the BJP of trying to topple his government. Speaking to the media after a show of strength with party MLAs, Kejriwal alleged BJP is ready to spend 800 crore rupees allegedly to lure 40 MLAs and asked where these funds are coming from. The BJP denied the allegations. The Delhi Chief Minister had called for a meeting of his MLAs today. Saurabh Bhardwaj of the Aam Aadmi Party said that 53 of the 62 AAP MLAs attended the meeting, and the Chief Minister spoke over the phone to the other MLAs who could not attend the meeting in person.
रेड के अगले दिन इन लोगों ने संदेश भेजा मनीष सिसोदिया जी को कि आप अरविंद केजरीवाल जी को छोड़ दीजिए, आम आदमी पार्टी को छोड़ दीजिए, आम आदमी पार्टी को तोड़ के कुछ विधायकों को लेके हमारे साथ आ जाइए, हम केजरीवाल जी की सरकार गिरा के आपको सीएम बना देंगे और हम आपके सीबीआई के और ईडी के सारे केसेस खत्म कर देंगे। हमारे एमएलए को एक एमएलए को 20-20 करोड़ रुपए का ऑफर दिया जा रहा है, 20-20 करोड़ रुपए का, कि आप 20 करोड़ रुपए ले लो और आप केजरीवाल जी की सरकार तोड़ दो, केजरीवाल जी को छोड़ दो, आम आदमी पार्टी को छोड़ दो और हमारे साथ आ जाओ।
The big international story: at least 25 people, including 2 children, dead after Russian missiles struck a railway station in East Ukraine. Russia, which has so far denied targeting civilian infrastructure, said that it hit a military train, killing hundreds of Ukrainian troops. The attack took place on a day when Ukraine marked 31 years of independence. Megan Fitzgerald joins us with more.
6 months after it launched its invasion, Russia showing no signs of letting up. These images from a railroad station where Ukraine says a Russian strike killed at least 22 people. This morning, air raid sirens in Kyiv, though no attack. The mayor telling us the city could once again be a Russian target.
Any second, any minute, the Russians' rockets can land in any building.
As Ukraine marks its Independence Day, painful reminders of the cost of war. A short drive from the capital, we arrived in Bucha. More than 450 Ukrainian civilians were killed here in the early days of the war. Russian soldiers accused of war crimes.
People come to cemeteries to remember those they've lost. But here in Bucha, where hundreds are buried, grave sites are marked by numbers only. Names will never be known.
Then there's Mariupol, now under Russian control. Ukrainian soldiers held out for weeks in a steel plant. Marina Schumacher's husband was one of them. A mother of 2 young boys, she spoke in April to NBC's Kelly Kobiea. They all want to live, she said. We followed up with Marina today. She says her husband was captured by the Russians, but she hasn't heard from him since. I don't know how to live without him, she said. We were together 27 years.
Are you scared?
Yes, she said. I'm scared.
Here in Kyiv, President Zelensky is still warning that the city could come under attack in the coming days.
And here's more on the ongoing energy crisis in Europe. The German government has approved a bylaw restricting the heating of public buildings and banning illuminated advertising hoardings to reduce its dependency on Russian gas. Germany is planning to cut gas usage by about 2% with these measures. Many European nations are considering capping Russian gas prices. Energy ministers from EU countries are already due to meet for a summit in October. President Joe Biden is likely to sign an executive order to kickstart the implementation process of the $280 billion CHIPS Act. The law is aimed at boosting domestic manufacturing and scientific research of semiconductors. Meanwhile, President Biden announced a student debt forgiveness plan last night. The announcement comes ahead of the midterm elections, which are scheduled in November. Tom Costello with more.
The news today will give millions of Americans a significant financial boost while fulfilling a Biden campaign pledge.
To provide more breathing room for people so they have less burden by student debt.
President Biden says the government will forgive federal student loan debt of up to $10,000 for those earning less than $125,000 a year. Pell Grant recipients will get $20,000 in loan forgiveness. Meanwhile, the pandemic loan payment pause will be extended through December. All of it a big relief for Kaya Jones, still paying down $38,000 in student loans after graduating from college 2 years ago. Buying a house, she says, has felt out of reach.
It is a disgrace that higher education costs so much. It's inaccessible to a large population of the people that live in the United States.
President Biden has been under pressure from within his own party to forgive as much as $50,000 in student debt, with lower and middle income Americans struggling the most to afford higher ed.
I don't think it's enough.
It's definitely a step, and I definitely think more is needed.
42% of those who go to college pay back loans over 5 years. The average household with student debt owes nearly $59,000.
They will see an improvement in their cost of living without having this student loan debt burden and be able to spend money.
But Americans are divided over whether the government should forgive any student loan debt. 30% of all adults say no. Some tweeting they'd paid off their student loans and should now be reimbursed. Republicans argue loan forgiveness benefits wealthier Americans who go to college while ignoring those who don't.
The president doesn't have the power just to unilaterally on his own eliminate entire categories of debt.
I think it's a fundamental tenet of American life that if you owe money, as challenging as it is, you have an obligation to pay it back.
Joe Biden announcing his forgiveness loan for students in America. And with that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of India Business Hour. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. The news continues here on CNBC-TV18.